Welcome back to the 81st online episode of Peacetime, hosted by Peacepoint, with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC in Azusa, California. In my previous session, we started to look at the Illuminated text mini-series by looking at a Buddhist teaching known as the Jula Dhamma Vibhanga Sutta, which explained the logic of karma, or at least about some of the outcomes you can expect from karmic action. It was a teaching from a part of the Buddhist scriptures called the Majjhima Nikaya, or the middle-length sayings. With the Dhamma talk today, we'll start to look at the Sigālovāda Sutta, which comes from a different part of the scriptures known as the Digha Nikaya, which means the long discourses. Even in the abridged version we'll be using today, it is still 6 pages long, which is why it will take a little longer than usual to cover the whole sutta. The reason I chose this particular teaching is because it's considered to be one of the key teachings on lay Buddhist ethics. And for those not familiar with the term lay people, it means Buddhist householders or those who are not monks. So today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes with 25 minutes of meditation halfway through and finishing up with questions sent in by viewers in advance. According to the website Access to Insight, in an article called Befriending the Suttas, there are many good reasons to make the efforts to study the Buddhist scriptures firsthand, even in translation. The reasons include that they are the primary source of Theravada teachings, because they present a complete body of teachings, because they offer a lot of practical advice, because they bolster confidence in the Buddhist teachings, because they support and energize your meditation, and because reading them is just plain good for you. Occasionally, some hardcore students of Buddhist scripture also ask me about the original scriptural language of the suttas which we are studying. And for those of you who don't already know, it's called the Pali language, which in Romanized orthography has those signature lines over the A's to tell you that they are long A's and so on. It's the same language that you're familiar with from the mantra Samma Arahang, which also has a dot under the M to make it into an ng sound. So we are working with an English translation from the Pali language. Because Indian languages tend to have more consonants and vowels than the English alphabet, they need to have special diacritics to preserve the meaning. I was recently asked where you could learn the Pali language, and although there are some degree or diploma university courses and even some summer schools in English medium at some Western universities, in person and online, actually you can learn a lot by self-study if you can get your hands on a book by A.K. Warder called An Introduction to Pali, now in its 3rd edition, and completing the first 16 exercises will give you a Pali vocabulary of about 2,000 words. But fortunately for us, we have a ready-made translation, so we won't need to translate the text for ourselves. Nonetheless, in order that viewers can maximize the benefits from learning the sutta today, we start by elucidating a little bit of the context of the Sigālovāda Sutta, the sources, the sutta name, the interlocutors, and the place names, as well as the backstory for the giving of the discourse. So let's start by looking at the sources. Today, to keep it short, I have chosen an abridged translation of the Sigālovāda Sutta from the selected text appendix of Walpola Rahula's book, What the Buddha Taught. The interpretation of the sutta comes from the work of our Vice Abbot in Thailand, the Venerable Dattachiwo, in his 2002 book, Kampi Patirupmanut, which I had a hand in translating to the book Blueprint for a Global Being in the year 2000, revised and expanded in 2003 for a 2nd edition entitled Reforming Society Means Reforming Human Nature. So to look at the meaning of the sutta name today, it is usually known as the Sigālovāda Sutta, but in some Buddhist countries it's known as the Sigālaka Sutta. Deconstructing the name, the word Sigala is the name of the person who the Buddha addresses in the discourse. The word Ovada just means discourse. So if you put it all together, the complete name of the sutta is A Discourse to Sigala. So the people who feature in this sutta are firstly the Blessed One, which is an epithet for the Buddha himself. The other person with whom the Buddha dialogues in the sutta is called Sigala, although sometimes you will see him referred to as Sigalaka, which is the genitive, or what would be known in English as the possessive form of his name. He was a young householder from Rajagaha. By disposition, he was rather a petulant teenager, possibly because he missed his deceased parents and the help they used to give him in managing the family legacy. In any case, Sigala grew up into a very stubborn guy, and right up to the time when his parents were on their deathbeds, he wouldn't listen to their advice. Sigala's parents only get a mention in the sutta because by the time it was taught, they had already passed away. It is because of their posthumous influence that Sigala eventually becomes interested to hear the teaching from the Buddha. So Sigala's mother, or Sigalaka Mata, originally belonged to a banker's family in Rajagaha, and having heard the Buddha preach, entered the order as a Buddhist nun, going on to become an arahant, and was recognized by the Buddha as the most outstanding nun for attaining release by faith, or sattha adimutanang. The other person mentioned is Sigala's father, who also ordained as a Buddhist monk later in life and was allocated the meditation object of a skeleton to develop reflection on death. However, as many of you will appreciate, parents' meditational attainments, example, and best efforts don't guarantee that their children would turn out as paragons of virtue. Sigala's parents had trouble with their son, but they knew that sometime in the future he would grow up enough to understand more about spiritual things, but probably not in their lifetime. And for those who are more academically inclined, I will mention that I was able to find out these details by consulting the Pali Book of Proper Names by Gunapala Vyasena Malalasekara, published again by the Pali Text Society, also available for free online at the link you can see on the slide from the German website palicanon.de. So, pulling up the manuscript itself, Paragraph 1 locates the sutta at a place called Rajagaha, which is called Rajgir in the present day, a city the ruins of which are still to be seen in northern India, and which was the capital of the kingdom of Magadha in northeast India. The squirrel's feeding ground, or Galandaka Niwapa, was part of the temple in Rajagaha called Veluwana Temple, which literally means a bamboo grove. It was historically the first temple to be accepted as a donation by the Buddhist community and was donated by King Bimbisara. In those days, temples were more like areas of forest for the monks to camp in than buildings. And again, as we mentioned in the previous session, to understand any sutta, you need to have some idea of the backstory. So jumping ahead to paragraph 4, on his deathbed, Sigala's father appealed to him. Will you do one thing for us before we die? So a little bit of emotional blackmail there, so that Sigala could hardly refuse what his dying father asked of him, which was to pay respect to the 6 directions every day. They didn't ask for anything more than simply paying respect to the 6 directions, which would have been an old Indian tradition of geomancy, perhaps connected with paying respect to the deities of the different quarters to have a more auspicious life. Consequently, Sigala kept his word, and each day he got up early in the morning, washed his hair, before going out and prostrating himself in the 6 different directions, north, south, east, west, above, and below. His parents knew that if he did that for long enough, someone would come along who'd be able to instruct him about why this was just a superstitious ritual, and tell him what he should be doing instead. So it turns out that this particular sutta tells us about what happened when it was the Buddha himself who came along in the morning and discovered Sigala doing the ritual of paying respect to the 6 directions. What we see in paragraph 5 is that the Buddha asked Sigala, "Wouldn't you like to know the real meaning behind the 6 directions?" The Buddha didn't criticize Sigala. He didn't say, "What a complete waste of time, what a stupid young man you are to do this." But in the diplomatic way characteristic of the Buddha, he said, "Well, that's great, but there may be a better way of doing this." He said, "Well, my disciples do this too, but following the discipline of the noble ones, or Arya, Of course, by this time, Sigala was more eager to learn than he had been when his parents were still alive. So at paragraph 6, we see Sigala requesting the Buddha, "Would you please teach me the proper way to do this ritual?" So, jumping to paragraph 9, in brief, the Buddha explains the proper way to do this ritual is the following, which is to put away the 4 vices in conduct, just as he does no evil actions from the 4 motives, just as he did not make towards the 6 doors of dissipating wealth, avoiding these 14 evil things, he is a guardian of the 6 quarters. So the structure of the remainder of the sutta is that he taught 2 sets of 4 teachings and 2 sets of 6 teachings. The groups of 4 entail the defilements of action and the causes of prejudice. The groups of 6 comprise the roads to ruin and the reciprocal duties in the 6 social sectors or directions. Also mentioned are true and false friends and guidelines for ethically procuring and dealing with wealth. So now we'll examine the content of the sutta, going through paragraph by paragraph. And for today, these first 14 things will probably be quite enough for an hour's worth of study time that we have available today. As for the 6 directions, they will have to be something that we keep for the next session along with the advice about wealth. So turning to paragraph 10, we are talking about the first set of 4 things, here referred to as vices of conduct, but which in our temple we tend to translate using the more literal term defilements of action, which comes from the Pali language for the term kamma-kilesa. Most of you will recognize the prefix gamma, which we already met in the Julalagama Vibhanga Sutta in the previous session, which means action. The suffix kilesa means a pollutant. So, generally speaking, in Buddhism, the term kilesa refers to impurities in the mind, but in this particular case, they are impure ways of treating others. And looking at this set of 4 different impure actions, you may be reminded of something which you have already studied previously in the context of Buddhism: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and telling lies. So you probably recognize these as the first 4 of the 5 precepts. So how come there are only 4? Is this a free pass on drinking alcohol? Actually, it's not, and I'll come back to the missing 5th precept in a moment. Basically, the defilements of action address the same issues that are addressed by the 5 precepts, the 5 precepts being exactly the same first 4 and adding on the action of drinking alcohol as a 5th thing to complete the baseline for lay morality. So, why should these 4 actions be impure? Well, we learned from the Julalagama Vibhanga Sutta in the previous session that a person who kills living beings reduces their own life expectancy in the future. Killing others is also discouraged because it's not very pleasant for the victim either, unless they happen to have a death wish. If you kill a person or an animal, you're taking away perhaps the most precious thing that they have, because life is the only opportunity you have to better yourself, whatever form of life you may be taking, whether you are disabled or otherwise debilitated, but it's still better than not being alive at all, because it's still not too late to change. But if someone stronger, more powerful than you should come along and suddenly curtail your life, then it's game over for you. Fear of death is probably one of the biggest fears that any person or anything can have. So if you have the lack of humanity for other living beings to the extent that you take away from them the thing that is the most precious to them, it doesn't really say very much for you as a person, right? If you use another word in English, you might say that they are inhumane. You have lost your sense of humanity. In Buddhism, we don't just perceive this as losing your sense of humanity towards other people, but also as losing your sense of humanity towards yourself. Why? Because if you look at what distinguishes humans from more humble animals, the only thing which distinguishes animals from people is that people have got a conscience and people have got a sense of compassion. And they don't just act on their selfish desires the whole of the time. It's the only thing which makes you as a person different from a savage. Stealing is pretty much the same. If you steal from a person, you may not be killing them directly, but if you're taking away their means of survival, then little by little, although you may not be killing them directly, but it's like you're killing them indirectly because you're making it more difficult for them to survive. So, second to killing, this is seen as an inhumane gesture to another being. Sexual misconduct generally refers to running off with someone else's loved one. Now, if that person happens to be married already, then they'll certainly have a husband or wife who will miss them. If they're not yet married, then technically they're still in the care of their parents, someone's son or daughter who their parents also worry about. Running off with them and having relations with them outside marriage is considered sexual misconduct. And of the three discussed so far, you might say that this can be one of the most emotionally painful experiences for those who are left aggrieved. If you look at the cuckolded husband or wife, you might say that they are left with a feeling worse than death, because they have to live with the shame or perceived treachery of broken trust from a previously stable relationship. So having respect for others' family integrity, which is basically what this defilement of action is all about, is an important part of our sense of humanity. If we don't respect the human need for trust in other people, then it means that we don't have much respect for ourselves either. The last defilement of action is telling lies, and this is to do with our sense of truth. As I mentioned with the previous defilement of action, our sense of trust for other people is something which gives value to life. You can be friends with a person, but if you find out that that friend has lied to you, even if it's only once, you wouldn't look at that person in the same way ever again. Whereas before you might have trusted what they said, but even the fact you know they've deceived you once means that you won't be able to take what they say at face value anymore. So the expectation of being able to trust another person is an important part of the sense of humanity which each person has. If we give in to these defilements of action, then rather than being a noble human being or Arya, we reduce ourselves to the level of nothing more than a wild animal, a beast, or a savage. So if you're talking about why these 4 defilements of action are important as an aid memoir, we can say these are to do with responsibility for our own human dignity, the yellow self at the center of the diagram. And this is our own human dignity as opposed to the human dignity of other people. It's defined by how we look at ourselves. Whether we have self-respect depends on how we treat other people or other beings with which we come in contact. So the thrust of the Sigālovāda Sutta is not the outcomes, in other words, what happens to the people who are the victims of your bad actions, but it's looking at what happens to you as the person when you stoop to that sort of behavior. You lose your own sense of human dignity. It is the most basic foundation for training yourself to be a good member of society or an upstanding example to the rest of the world. If you can get this right, then you have the possibility of moving further up the scale of spiritual perfection. But if you can't look at yourself in the mirror and trust yourself as a person, there's little point in deluding yourself that you'll be able to be up to the task of cultivating any more subtle aspects of spiritual transformation. Abstention from these 4 defilements of action is really at the core of every higher sort of practice which you can find in Buddhism. Certainly for society as a whole, if you wanted to choose people to have as your next door neighbors, I'm sure you'd want people who manage to refrain from the 4 defilements of action. It's therefore not much of a surprise that you find these 4 basic rules of conduct in the code of morality of pretty much every religion in the world. The next group of 4, which we see in paragraph 11, if you want to compare it to the previous set, is now talking not about responsibility for our own sense of human dignity, but this second set of 4 is responsibility for others. Supposing you're already an upstanding human being, you can look at yourself in the mirror and you still don't feel any sense of bad conscience, and now you have the chance to make more of a difference in the world. Maybe you find yourself in a position of responsibility whereby the sorts of decisions that you make influence the lives of others around you. You might find yourself in management. You might find yourself leading a household. If you were to ask yourself what additional virtues or personal qualities you'd need to be equal to the task, in a nutshell, what you need is responsibility not only for your own sense of human dignity, but also to uphold and respect others' sense of human dignity as well. Interestingly enough, this is to do with the sort of decisions which we make about other people's lives, decisions which may be affected by any of 4 different sorts of emotions that might cause the decision to be swayed by bias or prejudice. The 4 emotions or prejudices which can compromise the decisions we make into decisions which don't respect other people's human dignity are 4: attachment in our mind, hatred in our mind, delusion in the mind, or else fear in the mind. Again, you should notice that on the face of it, it seems less serious than a bad action, nothing more than the workings of your mind. But your decisions can affect other people's well-being quite drastically. I'll give an example of each one to illustrate my point. Supposing you were a parent and you found out that one of your children was using drugs, but instead of disciplining them or putting them through rehab, you try to cover up your child's dependence or give your child money to buy drugs. Although you know what they're doing is wrong, but because you are used to spoiling your child, maybe a little bit afraid of bringing dishonor to the family name, you fail to see the situation objectively. Instead of doing the right thing, because of favoritism for your child, you may say misplaced love for your child, you make the situation worse. You mistake your own human dignity for your child's long-term human dignity, forgetting that they might sleepwalk into additional hard drugs as a result of your negligence. So misplaced love mixed up with decision-making may cause your objectivity to be compromised, leading to a bad decision, which in the end is not good for the minors under your parental care. Example of a bad decision made because of hatred might be a sitting judge in court, tainted by racial hatred. So, for example, no matter what sort of black person comes up in court, the judge will always convict them, the so-called school-to-prison pipeline. So, in this particular case, decisions prejudiced by hatred will lead to black defendants being convicted irrespective of evidence or lack thereof. Delusion generally causes bad decisions when things are decided despite a lack of proper information. Let's say you're a manager, and although you haven't obtained all the critical facts you need, you go ahead and take the decision anyway, often with disastrous outcomes. Or supposing you're a school teacher and you see 2 children fighting, to save time you only bother to ask one of the children what the fight was about. When they say the other one started it, if you take that child at the word and punish the other one without getting their side of the story, not only is it unfair to the kids, but it undermines your credibility as a person who's supposed to uphold justice in the school. What are the kids going to learn from the way you intervened in the fight? They're going to learn that you are the sort of person whose decisions can't be trusted, and more generally that behaving responsibly is not worth the bother. So this is an example of a bad decision because of lack of information. You were deluding yourself that you knew what was happening, but you hadn't got all the facts at your fingertips. The last of the 4 prejudices is fear, which can also have a negative effect on people's decision-making. Sometimes we perceive a fearful person as someone to sympathize with, but if you are looking at the bigger picture, sometimes a fearful person can also be a dangerous person because they are likely to lash out with decisions which are not balanced. In Thailand, for example, and I don't know if it still happens these days, but in the old days, if you went through a red light, you could hold up your fingers like this. Does anyone know why it's like that? They do a 3-finger salute. Well, it's so that when the police call you over, they are not going to expect a bribe of any more than 300 baht to look the other way and let you off without a ticket. But to get back to fear, there are some people who are immune to getting caught by the police. Any idea who doesn't need the 3-finger salute? So without wishing to cause any offense, if you've got a soldier's cap, especially denoting a ranking officer, displayed prominently in the back window of your car, if the police realize that you're from the army, they'll automatically turn a blind eye. Because if it gets back to their boss that they've given a ticket to a soldier, then their next promotion will be out the window. So this is an example of not making the right decision because of fear, fear of not getting the promotion because of doing the right thing in this situation. So these are 4 examples of how objective decision-making can be interfered with by a person's emotions. If you have upgraded from merely looking after yourself to looking after a group of people whose well-being depends on your good decisions, then unless you can check yourself out to make sure that you're not under the influence of these 4 sorts of prejudice, you will end up as the worst sort of leader in that situation. If you ask what makes a good leader, then really it comes down to the decision-making. If a leader makes good decisions, then the people under their care usually can get along happily and productively. But if a leader's decision-making is biased, then they end up with a lot of problems, not least undermined credibility. So we can see from these 4 forms of bias, if we can avoid them in the same way that we avoided the 4 defilements of action, it's equivalent to giving ourselves an upgrade in society to a level of lower management. So what the Sigālovāda Sutta gives us is a sort of stepladder by which we can develop ourselves into a person with leadership qualities. So far, we've seen 2 lists of 4 items each, the defilements of action and the different origins of prejudice. It's probably a good juncture to take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 25 minutes of meditation, which today is a recording of the track entitled Unending Inner Light. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So if you'd like to settle yourself now for some meditation, and make sure you're comfortable enough to sit for a long time without having to move around too much. Close your eyes very gently, as softly as you can. And as usual, we slowly take a few good deep breaths to ourselves, and we follow the in-breath deeper into the body, down through the lungs, to the center of the body, letting the in-breath refresh ourselves on the inside. We take note of the point where the in-breath turns inside the body, because it's a point we will return to as a focus for our awareness. And on the out-breath, we release all the tensions or the discomforts from the inside out. And we relax the whole of our body, all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes. We slowly relax every part of the body, until there's no single part of ourselves with any remaining stress or tension anymore. We release the tension and let it go, as if we are surrendering every last muscle into a soothing tide of relaxation. We turn our attention to relax the mind as well. It's equally important for both body and mind to be relaxed. It may take a few moments, but it's not that hard for us to achieve. We just need to be patient enough to allow both body and mind to relax thoroughly. And we allow the mind to wind down by resting the consciousness or the awareness within the space of the body, softly and continuously. So we learn to rest our mind within this space softly for a few moments. We always maintain relaxation throughout our time of meditation. We check in with the center of the body by taking a deep breath again, to remind ourselves of the location of this point. All we need to do is to return the mind to its natural place of balance at the center of the body. We treat ourselves to a few moments of quiet, touching gently with our awareness at the center of the body, slowly, without any hurry at all, remaining tranquil and still the whole of the time. The nature of existence is an endless journey through unknowing. It is a journey through obscurity that is the lot of all living beings. Our earth is illuminated by the bright light of the sun and the moon. Yet such light reveals only the outside world beyond our skin. But what about on the inside of our skin, so important for our self-understanding and a sense of meaning in life? Normally, the inner world should be illuminated by the light of the mind. But if we lack inner illumination, we will be unable to engage safely with the inner aspects of our existence. Inner light has been dismissed as a mere hallucination by some modern-day neurophysicists, but is not easily revealed. It lies beyond ordinary space-time and beyond the grasp of the natural mind. It is an inner experience that transcends the brain or the nervous system, entangled in worldly ideas and philosophical speculations. The part of the mind we're talking about shines out with its own clear light. When meditation is practiced successfully, it has the power to recover that inner light. So one good reason that we are gathering today to meditate together is in order to immerse ourselves in that inner light, so essential to meaning-making in our lives. Emotional struggles in our life can be unsettling without such inner light to help us see how we fit into the bigger picture. Although the nature of existence can be a mystery to us, but if we know how to initiate bright inner light, we can avail ourselves of a feeling of security and confidence as we make our way through life. The wisdom traditions of the East have always involved cultivating inner light as a strategy to make the best of our existence in this world, to pull our lives out of the emotional shadows. And to this end, many of the wisdom traditions of the East teach us how to cultivate inner light. And in this connection, the center of the body can be the source. This inner point is the source of the light where, by reaching inward with our awareness, we can generate light inside. So we allow the mind to reach inward toward the light source inside for a few moments, while always maintaining a sense of relaxation the whole of the time. It is a kind of inner awakening fueled by the inner light in the mind. At this level of description, the shape of the mind is spherical, a sphere that shines with an inner light, a round sphere that's self-illuminating. By resting the mind at this point, the source is illuminated by the bright inner light in the mind. Immerse yourself in the bright, silvery inner light as it shines forth its radiance. Allow the light or the inner feeling that you have brightness inside to continue on and on, with the mind shining forth its radiance. And now we have learned to initiate bright light by ourselves. We reach inwardly with the mind, reaching gently with our awareness toward the inner light shining in the mind at the center of the body. The inner light foretells the arising of peace in the mind, like the light before the dawn. The inner light replicates the real, spherical nature of the mind. So we continue to connect with the source of the inner light for a few moments more. For many people, the stream of thoughts in the mind is almost continuous, and it's hard to find a single break in the thoughts to give ourselves that sense of peace and quiet. In such a case, to open up a space between the thoughts in the mind, we make use of something called a mantra, which is basically a word that we repeat to ourselves silently, as if we hear the sound of it coming up from the center of our bright object. The traditional mantra for this meditation method is the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And we hear the sound of those words coming up as if like a silent music from the center of ourselves. From the center of the bright object over and over again, gently encouraging the mind to become free of thought, while at the same time linking our awareness more closely with this point in the center of the body. By meditation, we can ensure that brightness is always the color of our lives, by gaining an increasingly brilliant inner light in which to immerse ourselves. Life may be too short to procure all the pleasures we crave, because each instance of pleasure never lasts long enough for us. This is why people are constantly obsessed with seeking out happiness from the things around them. A much better place to seek enduring happiness and peace would be from the inside, and meditation is key to unlocking the happiness that has been so elusive in the outside world. Meditation can help us harvest the happiness from the inside. But we need to meditate for the right reasons. An effective motivation for meditation is not to think that we are developing the mind as an escape, to gain superpowers, clairvoyance, or divination. Because all these motivations are incompatible with the purity of healthy progress in meditation. The desired goal of this meditation is, in general terms, to provide us with the opportunity to see life as it really is, to see beyond suffering and impermanence, while not becoming attached to an illusory ego. If we can come to know these truths, then, because of this understanding of these truths, we will be able to conduct ourselves in such a manner that the shadows of suffering in life will be minimized. Life cannot be truly bright unless meditation brings us to the center of the body and to the inner light. Especially when in the outside world each source of pleasure is so fleeting. But when inner light can be never-ending, the rule of transient pleasure in the outside world no longer applies. Since in this inner kingdom, light is as endless as it is unbounded. So the more you bring your awareness to abide in the kingdom of light, in the center of the body, the more bright light inside will permeate through, even to your complexion and the aura of your personal appearance. That's why if you meditate often, if your interior is ever bright, such brightness will shine through into external aspects of your life, until your life starts to mirror the light within. You will become unified with the body of bright light within yourself. So now that we've discovered inner light, we let the brightness from inside dispel the shadows of the outside world, drawing upon inner light to brighten the outside. Meditation will extend the light of compassion to connect the internal and the external spheres of our life. So we allow the mind to remain immersed in the soft inner brightness as continuously as we can, for as long as we can. Immerse yourself in soft light. Immerse yourself in bright light of such a shining inner light at the center of the body. We continue to make sure the physical body and the mind are truly relaxed. We immerse ourselves in the brightening glow of the inner light within the mind. Since after all your good efforts in meditation, you deserve to be first in line when it comes to attaining inner peace. The experience of inner light is an ecumenical experience shared by mystics and meditators alike from across different faith traditions. Light has been used as a privileged metaphor in the language of mysticism and experiential religions going back to the ancient Greeks and the wisdom traditions of the East. Saint Augustine in his Confessions spoke of the light unchangeable. Whoever knows truth knows that light, and whoever knows that light knows eternity. Similarly, Saint Teresa of Avila described her inner light, saying, "Even if I were to spend years and years imagining how to invent anything so beautiful, I could not do it. And I do not know even how I could try. For even in its whiteness and radiance alone, it exceeds anything you could imagine. It is not a radiance that dazzles, but a soft whiteness and an infused radiance. Even in experience at the end of life, many patients have witnessed a light without shadow, an all-suffusing light, which comes up as a central metaphor in near-death experiences. Light which enfolds the whole universe, so bright, but yet without hurting the eyes, brighter than anything you've encountered in your whole life, an enormously bright light that seems to cradle you, glorious and perfect, nurturing you, an extremely bright light, pure white or blue-white light, a living light that seems to communicate and acknowledge us. And with this light comes a feeling of absolute pure love, the warmest possible feeling, absolutely vivid and clear, like a crystallized light, beaming with a brightness in every direction, totally absorbing your consciousness, radiating from the very center of your consciousness out to the infinite expanses of the universe. And it's time now to share bright light to all the other beings with whom or with which we share our world and our existence. We allow bright light to expand as a sphere, to become bigger and wider, like the volume of light is expanding from a small sphere inside us, to become a bigger, a wider sphere, expanding endlessly. We let our inner light shine for all other beings in our world who share our existence. And since the color of our lives has now become the color of light, we immerse ourselves in the journey, in the nature of the existence, together with the brightness that we have created for ourselves. From here on in, we will allow bright light to continue to emanate bigger and brighter always, to share our happiness of the journey to others without exception, for a few more moments in silence. Putthanuppāvena, Sappathammanuppāvena, Sappasaṅkhānuppāvena, Sattha Soti, Bhavantu Hey. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So for today, let's return gently to our study of the manuscript of the Sigālovāda Sutta, as we continue by considering what this translation calls the 6 doors of dissipating wealth. Usually in our temple, we translate this same Pali word, abhayamukha, as the 6 roads to ruin. On face of it, these 6 items may just look like extravagances that personally waste your money, things like gambling. Obviously, they are a temptation which, if you give in to them, instead of being able to build up your finances or put your wealth to good use, you'll find it's frittered away for nothing. But the reason the Buddha pointed out the damage of these 6 roads to ruin goes deeper than just personal expense. And if we look at the things included in the roads to ruin, maybe we'll start to see why. Because besides bankrupting us, they also corrupt the economic system in our society. Our investment in these items indirectly makes society into a less wholesome place to live and bring up our children. So the first road to ruin is drinking alcohol, and for those of you who wondered where the 5th of the 5 precepts disappeared to, instead of appearing with the 4 defilements of action, it has reappeared here. It wasn't forgotten, but it's been added to the roads to ruin because it's the first of the ways in which people may dissipate their wealth or ruin themselves, especially because of the addictive nature of liquor, where to get the same kick, you constantly need to drink more. So this is why the Buddha recommended abstaining from alcohol completely, with the conviction that it's possible to enjoy your life without having to be drunk. Furthermore, if you refrain from drinking alcohol, it means that the whole brewery industry has a reduced role in your society. And if you think about all the contingent social problems, whether it's drink driving, the drunk and disorderly on the streets, or alcohol-fueled soccer hooligans, there are so many antisocial behaviors which are avoided by removing alcohol from the equation. Without recourse to alcohol, the whole quality of living in society is improved, whether on the level of the family or more personally. This is why if we are to use the equivalent wording on human dignity that we used for the previous 2 sets of behaviors to be avoided, with the avoidance of roads to ruin, we find ourselves talking about responsibility for human dignity on the level of society and economics. Because refraining from these roads to ruin actually starts to help society heal itself from many social ills. As you'll see from paragraph 13, the manuscript lists 6 dangers of drink: loss of wealth, increase of quarrels, susceptibility to disease, a damaged reputation, indecent exposure, and ruining one's intelligence. The second road to ruin to be refrained from is something which is rather euphemistically referred to as roaming the streets at unseemly hours. You might assume this means that by imposing a curfew, then this sort of social evil would just disappear. But the expression roaming the streets at unseemly hours is a delicate way of saying not frequenting prostitutes. So, some young men hopefully asked the monks, how about we roam the streets during the daytime instead? Actually, the misleading translation causes people to miss the point, that it is not about the time of day, but a prohibition against going to red light districts at any time of the day. So you can probably see for yourself that this item is connected with human dignity. If you assume that not all sex workers entered their profession from their own free will, you might picture the set of social and economic forces which hold sex workers to ransom. If you also consider the nature of a society that tolerates having its members subject to indignity in order to earn a living, you will see the economic and social impact for the clientele. For Buddhists, the ideal is that every person in society should have an equal chance to lead a dignified life without having to be exploited by some other sectors of society. As you'll see from paragraph 14, the manuscript lists 6 perils for frequenting the streets at unseemly hours. The client leaves themselves unprotected and their wife and children unguarded. They leave their property or wealth unprotected. They may be suspected of crimes they didn't do. They will attract malicious gossip, and they may get into unconnected trouble. The third road to ruin on the list, which needs to be refrained from, is frequenting shows, which in modern-day parlance would be anything to do with excessive indulgence in entertainment, although the manuscript just uses the expression haunting fairs. In present day, it would even include things like spectator sports. It looks a lot more innocuous than alcohol or prostitution, so I probably owe you a little bit of an explanation, especially with the vague way it's described in the manuscript. The main point of including entertainment in the road to ruin is that if people are so obsessed with entertainment and sports that they no longer go to work anymore, this is why it becomes a danger to your wealth and the economy more widely. It crosses the line to become a road to ruin when you are so obsessed that you end up as a sports junkie stuck in front of a PSN all day long instead of earning a living. Such obsession also becomes a danger for society at large when sports and entertainment become more important than social welfare. This happens a lot in already so-called advanced economies where whole neighborhoods are centered around the football stadium, which is the main wealth generator for that city. It gets all back to front where social policymakers in the city have to take their cues from the local sports team. This is no longer your ideal society, and the main reason for the heavy investment in sports is that most sports are supported indirectly by some sort of gambling. So behind the mega wealth of sports teams is the support they get from gambling cartels and the spectators who are addicted to sports by the bets they placed. As you'll see from paragraph 15, the manuscript lists 6 perils of obsession with entertainment, which is that you will constantly be asking, where can I see dancing? Where is there singing, music, recitation, cymbal playing, the beating of tam-tams? Next road to ruin is possibly more obvious because it mentions gambling directly. This would include things like lotteries, casinos, or even bingo. The amounts of money sloshing around in the gambling cartels is incredible. Some of it is above board, but much more is below the radar of legal auditing. I once heard the incredible figure that 2 to 5% of global GDP, so 800 billion up to 2 trillion US dollars, is illegal funds being laundered. And a lot of this goes through businesses such as gambling, which people very easily get killed over because the stakes are so high. Anyone getting involved with gambling on any sort of level will find it is not only a danger to themselves, but it's a danger for society because it breeds the attitude that riches can be disconnected from honest work. It idealizes getting rich by scams and shortcuts. If any of you have experience with gambling, and I don't personally, but people have told me about it, they say that if you win, then you want to play more, because you want to win even more than you did last time. When you lose, you still want to play more, out of vengeance to win your money back again. One of our rather eccentric imitators was a regular at the local casino in Belgium, once told me that when you check in at the casino, the first thing they do is to take $20 off you. $20 which you may not use to buy casino tokens. Any idea why? Well, that $20 is reserved for your taxi fare home, because once you get into the casino, you will become so desperate that you will gamble away even the money you'd set aside to go home with. There's an expression in Thai that having your house burned down is still not as bad as having a gambler in your family. Can you think why? I'll repeat, having a house burned down is still not as bad as having a gambler in your family. Well, if your house burns down, you've still got something valuable, which is the land the house was built on. But if you have a gambler in the family, you will lose even the land your house was built on because they will gamble away even the things that you don't own. They will run up debts so that even if your house burns down, you won't be left with the land on which the house was built. So you'll see from paragraph 16, the manuscript lists 6 perils of gambling. If a gambler wins, they are hated. If they lose, they mourn their lost wealth. They waste their wealth, Their word has no weight in an assembly, especially a court of law. They are despised by their friends and companions. They will not be considered eligible for marriage because people say that a gambler will never make a good spouse. So the fifth category of roads to ruin is associating with bad company, which is like being guilty by association. Even if you do manage to extricate yourself from drink, drugs, gambling, and prostitution, but you mix with the wrong sort of friends, indirectly they will lead you back into contact with a sleazy lifestyle. So in a word, you need to choose your friends carefully. As you'll see from paragraph 17, the manuscript lists 6 perils of associating with evil friends, which are that you will get ensnared by the attitudes of gamblers, libertines, tipplers, cheats, swindlers, and people of violence. Last but not least in the road to ruin is making sure you are not too lazy to work for a living. Laziness is a form of addiction because the lazier you are, the lazier you get. If you can get away with doing only a half day's work, then you aspire to having a passive income instead. And I should clarify that this is a completely different issue from unemployment. What I'm talking about is being work shy for no good reason. Although it may look like monastic life is pretty cushy, most monks' agendas are usually pretty full of activities for self-training or to serve the community. The only difference from lay people being that they don't get a living wage in remuneration. Some say that laziness doesn't count after retirement, but even senior citizens should try to stay active, but choosing tasks appropriate to their capabilities. In traditional Buddhist societies, old people don't actually retire, but they tend to adopt a more prominent role in, let's say, bringing up and educating their grandchildren. It's a task that's not as physically demanding as a 9-to-5 job, and since grandparents have a lot of wisdom which they can share from their life experience, the young children in their care can learn a lot from them about Buddhist culture and nurturing virtue. All the things the parents are too busy to impart because they have to work all day long. But generally speaking, as a person gets older within Buddhist culture anyway, it would be seen as a good thing if they spend more time in spiritual pursuits than they would have done when they were younger. So avoiding laziness for old folks means not prevaricating about their own spiritual work. As you will see from paragraph 18, the manuscript lists 6 manifestations of idleness. A man says it is too cold and does no work. He says too hot and does no work. He says too early or too late and does no work. He says I'm too hungry or too full and does no work. And while all that he should do remains undone, he makes no money, and such wealth as he had dwindles away. Why are these 6 roads to ruin tagged on the end of the prejudices and defilements of action? Well, avoiding the 6 roads to ruin is said to be more challenging than avoiding 2 sets of forward behaviors I've mentioned because they tend to be pitfalls of even high-profile people in leadership. If you think about all the scandals which plague politicians and celebrities, they tend to originate somewhere within the 6 roads to ruin. They undermine the credibility of a person that they need to lead other people, the credibility to show that you are concerned for the dignity of the whole of society. And if you're thinking to upgrade your standing in society to a level where you can be in a position of leadership, then you do need to scrutinize yourself to make sure you're not still involved with any of the 6 roads to ruin, not just to protect your hard-earned wealth, but also from the point of view of credibility and concern for the dignity of society as a whole. The Venerable Detachable has taken the initiative of visualizing these 3 sorts of responsibilities as a triangle that shows 3 levels of responsibility for human dignity and leadership. Starting off with responsibility for your own sense of human dignity, so self in yellow at the center of the diagram, by not killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, or lying. That way we ensure that we have responsibility for ourselves. Having fulfilled these basic requirements of being an upstanding human being, we move up to the responsibility for the human dignity of others, this represented by SOC in red at the lower left-hand corner, by not allowing your decisions to be swayed by attachment, hatred, delusion, or fear. Only in this way can we become a person who fulfills the challenges of middle management, allowing us to make a good job of what we are doing. If we can manage to fulfill these intermediate requirements, we can upgrade to responsibility for human dignity on the economic level, or on the level of society, econ in brown in the lower right-hand corner of the triangle, by avoiding the 6 roads to ruin, that is, alcohol, roaming streets at unseemly hours, entertainment, gambling, associating with bad company, or succumbing to laziness. So by avoiding the 6 roads to ruin, we have taken a step higher because it protects the human dignity of society at large. So to commit to memory 14 things we need to avoid, we should use them mnemonic 446. There is one final corner of the triangle which we don't have time to look at today, which is at the apex, which is to do with our social relations or our human environment. And this is to do with what's known as the 6 directions, which we'll return to in the next session. Before I leave you today, there is one other thing which the Buddha mentions in the Sigālovāda Sutta, which is to do with the sorts of friends we choose. And you could say the Buddha had gone into extra detail here on the topic of friendship because he doesn't just mention bad things to avoid, but also good friends who we ought to actively seek out and associate with. So, first, the friends who are bad news, and then the friends who are good news. So just now we saw that associating with bad company can be a road to ruin. This portrayal comes as a surprise to some because we tend to assume that we ought to try to be friendly with everyone. Trying to be a friend to the world is thought to be a key way of expressing compassion. However, it turns out that there are some people for whom we need to have clear boundaries in order to avoid picking up their bad habits. So, who exactly are we talking about when we are talking about the sorts of friends who are bad company? Paragraph 19 lists 4 sorts of persons who should be considered foes in the guise of friends. So the less than ideal translation of the manuscript refers to the 4 categories of false friends using the ambiguous descriptions rapacious, lip service, flatterer, and wastrel. Instead for clarity, I'm going to retranslate the categories as the mercenary, the friend of empty promises, the flatterer, and the friend who leads us towards roads to ruin. For each of these 4 types of false friends, 4 identifying features are given. Moving now to paragraph 20, the mercenary is explained as a false friend who tries to separate you from your wealth. If they don't get it from you directly, then they may sacrifice a little in the short term in the hope of getting a lot more from you further down the road. For example, they might help you out once in hope that you'll feel indebted to them and have to help them out a lot more in the future. So they may let you borrow $10 you didn't really need in the hope of being able to borrow $1,000 from you later in the future. They will only help others when they are threatened by the same danger, and they only make friends to serve their own self-interest. For the friend of empty promises, continue to beware, as we find further detail in paragraph 21. They like to tell you about the things which they would have shared with you if only it hadn't run out before it got to you, all about the really tasty desserts which ran out before you arrived. That's the sort of gesture of someone who's not really a trustworthy friend. They promise to share things with you that they didn't yet have to share. They make empty promises to win favor with you, but every time you ask them for help, they've got some excuse why they can't come through. This is a sort of friend who manages to let you down in every situation. In the next paragraph, number 22, the flatterer is described as someone who agrees with everything you do, no matter whether it's good or bad. You might think that they would be supportive, the yes man who says, great idea, whatever you suggest, but in Buddhism, we prefer the friend who watches your back. If they see you doing something which is reckless or careless, then they will warn you about what you're doing in advance, rather than just spinelessly sucking up to anything you say. Rather, they'll be looking out for you. If they see you doing something reckless, then they will tell you that you ought to be more careful. You shouldn't be doing that anymore. So the friend is often someone who is wiser than we are. That is the sort of person with whom Buddhists consider it is worth associating, whereas a person who just leaves you to your mistakes is not really considered a true friend. A true friend is someone who will warn you if you're doing something stupid. Furthermore, the flatterer will sing praises to your face but gossips about you behind your back. Finally, we see in paragraph 23, a false friend will also be a person who involves you with the roads to ruin, encouraging and accompanying you to bars, red light districts, spectator sports, or the casino. So you can imagine that having friends like that, you don't need to go looking for enemies. So coming to paragraph 24, we now turn away from false friends who are unlikely to offer spiritual friendship towards true friends who are more likely to offer spiritual friendship. These are the upstanding people in the world with whom we should try to associate, because the Buddha emphasized in the Dutiya Seka Sutta of the Itivuttaka that almost the whole of our ability to train ourselves to be a better person comes from the advice and example of a good friend. Sometimes the word for a good friend is the same word used technically in Buddhism, the word Kalyana Mitra. You may have heard this term before because it's very important as a principle behind the outreach work which our temple does. Once we recognize that most people only do good things in their life because someone else encourages them to do it, then we realize that it's very important to go out and encourage people to do things which are good in their lives. If you leave people to their own devices, normally they can't be bothered to try doing anything better than what they did before. They need encouragement, advice, and an example to follow. They need a true friend to cheer them on. If we come back to the Sigālovāda Sutta, we find out what sort of qualities such a good friend actually has. We see that a true or noble friend is one who is helpful, constant, gives wise counsel, and is sympathetic. These are the qualities which a good friend has, and for each of the 4 categories, there are 4 identifying features. Going to paragraph 25, the helpful friend is one who protects you when you're off your guard. So they don't just let you suffer from your mistakes. If your property is at risk, then they'll look out for it on your behalf. So they'll keep an eye on your house when you're away on vacation. If you're in danger, then they'll be a refuge to you. And if you ask for something from them, they're not going to turn you away. But if they're really your friend, they'll give you twice as much as you asked for. So they'll not palm you off with excuses when you need them. Turning to paragraph 26, a constant friend is a friend who confides in you. They don't spread your secrets around. They don't abandon you when you fall on hard times. If you're rich and famous, it's not hard to find friends, but your true friends will be the ones who, once you've lost your fame and fortune, especially after you go bankrupt, are still willing to be your friend. Normally, once you go broke, the ones who are not really your friends will sort of disappear into the woodwork. But the ones who stay with you regardless are the ones who are your true friends. In English, there's the expression, a friend in need is a friend indeed, which means that you can tell who your real friends are when you are in the situation where you are reliant on their help. Lastly, the constant friend would even die in your place. So I think that signifies how rare this category of friends really is. Moving on to paragraph 27, the next category of true friends is the one that gives good counsel. Again, this comes back to the fact that a good friend, rather than being a peer, is often someone who is more perceptive and more experienced than we are. So if we are doing something bad, they don't just let us continue doing it, but they say, look, this is a bad idea. It's going to end badly for you further down the line. It's better if you avoid doing that anymore. If you're doing something good, then they encourage you to do more of the same. If you have something new to tell you, then they'll save it up to tell you later, not just tell you the same old things again and again, things which you already heard. Lastly, they point you in the direction of heaven. And arriving at the final category of true friend in paragraph 28, we meet with what is known as the sympathetic friend. They don't laugh at you when you have misfortunes, but if you do have good fortune, then they're not envious of you, but they congratulate you on it. If someone else speaks badly about you behind your back, then they will help to correct that person's perceptions, so they defend you behind your back. And if someone else speaks well of you, then they will back them up. So this is the sort of friend who, if we want to develop virtue and reduce impurities in our mind, would be the sort of person who we should be trying to seek out. So in the sutta, the Buddha is drawing Sigālovāda's attention to the proper principles of friendship. We can surmise that the Buddha's special emphasis on friendship means that this stubborn young man called Sigala had probably got in with the wrong sort of people. And this is why the Buddha kept returning to this point about what sort of friends he should choose. As for the sectors of society in which we might develop friendships with other people, then that's something I'm going to talk about a little more next session. And that will bring us to the second set of the sixes, which is going to be the real meaning of the term six directions, which, as we shall see, actually means six sectors of society with whom we have to get along closely if we are going to achieve success. So for this session, bookmark it there for now as I leave you halfway through the Sigālovāda Sutta. So to finish off with today, we have a question sent in by one of our viewers, Cleopatra of Phoenix, Arizona. And here comes a question. Recently, I was very fortunate enough to give birth to a healthy baby daughter. Because I love meditation myself, I'd like to take the earliest opportunity to introduce my daughter to meditation. My question is about the age at which I can realistically introduce my daughter to meditation and what strategy I should use to introduce it to her. Hi, Cleopatra, and thank you for your question. I hope the heat wave in Arizona is cooling down a bit for you now. Your question is a good one, basically how to teach meditation to children. The lowest age I have successfully managed to teach meditation to kids is about 3 years old, although typically 7 years old is an easier time to start because meditation is an abstract task requiring imagination and so forth. So thinking Piaget, pre-operational stage kids find meditation hard. Nonetheless, you can teach meditation as a game to younger kids if you give them a candy and get them to imagine that they can see it as it goes down their throat into their stomach, and then ask them to change the color and make it brighter in their imagination. Some experts like Jane Matters in her 1987 book, Relax and Be Happy, Techniques for 5 to 18-year-olds, also maintains you have to teach children what relaxation means first by contrast between clenching muscles and relaxing muscles to underline what relaxation means. This is all for very young kids, so from age 2 to 7, you would need to reference the physical. Once kids get the hang of meditation, however, you can promote it in a way to relax and settle down before going to bed. A suitable length of meditation for kids should be quite short, for as many minutes as they are years old. So for a 10-year-old, 10 minutes. Alternatively, they can sit for meditation alongside mom, but sneak quietly out when their number of minutes is up. For other tips and tricks on bringing up children gently, there is a good book from our temple in Thailand called Family Day by Day, which you might be interested to flick through. And without wishing to blow my own trumpet too much, you're probably aware I did give a talk specifically on child raising for the Sunday Peacetime episode of April 24th, 2022, the link to which you can find on Peace Point's YouTube channel under the title of Enlightened Living, Lesson number 12, Cherishing One's Children. In addition, there are a few meditation tracks for kids on MindGem. The ones from me have the prefix MC and generally are about 10 minutes long. I should also add that in our Azusa Temple branch, we try to organize a kids activity between 11 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. every third Saturday of the month with activities on meditation, a Dhamma talk, arts and crafts, discussion, almsgiving, and a little bit of Thai language. So this session I've introduced to you the first part of the Sigālovāda Sutta. So for my next live session online, which will fingers crossed be a week on Sunday morning, we'll move on to the second part of the Sigālovāda Sutta. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out on the slide. And I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you achieve greater success in life by avoiding the 14 categories of behavior I've mentioned, while becoming a better judge of character when it comes to choosing your friends. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.